I need some traction. You need some traction.
Hey everyone, Lloyd Lobo here, co-founder at Traction and Boast AI. Today's Traction webinar is brought to you by Boast AI Launch Academy in partnership with Growth Blazers. Folks, as you're joining, please hit everyone and introduce yourself. Your name, what does your company do, what you're looking to get out of this session. I am tuning in from Austin, Texas. Away from my typical self in San Francisco Bay Area. And our speaker today, Sumeru Chatterjee Sumo. Where are you tuning in from? Vancouver, Canada.
Live from Vancouver, Canada.
Live from Vancouver, one of my favorite cities. We host our Traction Conf there. So folks, yeah, please introduce yourself to everyone in the chat. And if you have any questions, type them in the Q&A tab and we'll take them at the end. A lot of people from Vancouver, usually we get like a very global audience. You got Brooklyn, you got North Van, you got Mexico, you got Australia, Dallas, Tampa, Toronto, Copenhagen, wow, Lagos, Tampa, Ohio, Los Angeles, Mr. International, Muscat, Oman. Wow, we have a truly international audience here. To check out Sumo Slam, the community talk here. Awesome. One of my favorite topics, because we bootstrap Boast to 8 figures in revenue by building this Traction community. I have this fundamental belief: fall in love with your customer and make them successful beyond your product or service. If you build a community, you will not become a commodity. And if you look at companies like Nike, Peloton, Shopify, Duolingo, HubSpot, they've all built massive communities, right? Like a Nike, they sell a commodity, it's shoes, but they celebrate athletes and athletics. You look at HubSpot, they convince the world that everyone can become a marketer. They build a community around marketers. Gainsight, they created the whole customer success phenomenon. I mean, customer success is nothing novel, but customer support done proactively. Shopify is building a community around direct-to-consumer entrepreneurship. They convince the world everyone can be an entrepreneur. Apple, they have a massive community. They've convinced the world that everyone can become a creator. So, great learnings here, and couldn't be more excited to have my good friend Sumeru Chatterjee talk about his experience in building community and some really good case studies. So he's also known as the community guy for SaaS. He runs communities over 200,000, 250,000 people across platforms like YouTube, Telegram, and Slack, and built community programs at leading SaaS unicorns like Gong, Thinkific, and Adapar. And he's passionate about studying cult-like brands and their loyal followings and sharing community building tips with growth stage companies. So Sumo, you got a great set of slides, and I am super, super stoked to have you here. Without further ado, take it away.
Thanks, Lloyd.
Also a great dressing sense. I love that jacket. I gotta wear some more formal stuff.
I'm trying to rep my Indian heritage. Thanks for having me. I feel like if you're just breaking for lunch, if you're on the West Coast or you're on the East Coast, you need to shake up. I'm just gonna play some music, just like set up, feel free to stretch out. We're gonna talk about community. It's gonna be high energy. We're gonna go through 100 case studies, not 100 case studies, but 100 slides of different case studies and just learn about what community is. So let me just get into like a rhythm and then we'll jump right in. I want to give a quick shout out to a couple of people in the chat. I see Jen here. Jen is somebody who Lloyd and I have both worked with. And so Jen, thanks for being here. And if I haven't met you yet, you can scan that little QR code and connect with me on LinkedIn. One of my goals this year is to connect with more community leaders and thinkers. And so I'd love to connect with you if I haven't already. Okay, so let's jump in today. We're going to talk about a couple of things. But first, put it in the chat if you know what brand this is about. If you just look at this little GIF, what motorcycle brand are people talking about here? Okay, Susie says it's Harley, so that's the right answer. Anyone know what cartoon this is from? Any guesses on, if you just look at this, what cartoon is this from? So this is from South Park. So in 2007, South Park made an iconic dig at the cult-like following of this motorcycle brand called Harley Davidson. And about a decade later, there was another brand that used a lot of the same tactics that Harley had used initially, to also build a cult-like following and grew their loyal fan base and their member base to an astronomical number. Any guesses on what this brand is? There's no logos here, no company names. Okay, so D says this is Peloton, so that's the right answer. And so the question that I'm going to ask you today, so ask yourself this: what did Peloton do? You know, they sell at-home fitness bikes. So what did Peloton do that in 2020 made them more valuable than Ford Motors, the oldest car company in the world? Why in 2020 was Peloton worth $35 billion, whereas Ford, which makes hundreds of thousands, like millions of cars per year, worth only 30 billion? If you can answer this question earnestly and honestly and confidently, then I think then this session will have been a success. And over the next 15, 20 minutes, we'll sort of break down what the big reason is. Okay, so if you've been around in the community, or if you're in SaaS or education, or if you're in software business, you might have heard a lot of buzzwords here, like there's crypto, there's NFTs, there's blockchain, and I feel like there's a lot of buzzwords that at least they feel like to me right now. But the question we're going to try and answer is, what is the underlying signal? So if crypto and Web3 are buzzwords and they kind of feel overwhelming, ask yourself, what is the underlying signal that is powering these things? And so that's what we're going to talk about. My name is Sumeru Chatterjee. I love community strategy. I also go by Sumo, like the wrestlers from Japan. Like I said, I'm from Vancouver, also called Van. And I have the absolute privilege of running communities at some of the world's best companies like Thinkific and Gong, as well as Adapar. And I've been in SaaS education and SaaS community building for the last 7 or 8 years. And I've been really studying what cult-like SaaS brands do and how they build these massive audiences. So these are some of the communities I run. Thinkific, the Thinkific community, which connects over 30,000 online course creators. CustomerEducation.org, which is a B2B SaaS community for customer enablement professionals. And ShareCoro, which is a community of about 150,000 people who are investors in Bangla. So those are some of the communities I run. And I'm going to pull out some of the insights into today's talk. And what I'm seeing is I'm seeing a big shift in SaaS. I've been in SaaS for about 7 years, first in Silicon Valley, now in Canada, and I'm seeing a big shift. At first, we had what I call SaaS 1.0. This was a top-down approach where the buyer was the executive, like an executive or a decision maker. They bought a SaaS product, and then they told the rest of the team to use it, and it was adopted by the rest of the team. So it was a top-down approach. This is SaaS 1.0. And here, the barrier to entry was a really great sales and marketing function that would be able to get to those senior decision makers or those senior executives who would buy your software. Then in about 2010, we saw a shift to a new model, which was a product-led model. And this is what I call SaaS 2.0. And there are many companies like Slack and HubSpot that adopted this model. And here, the first user was actually the ultimate user of the product. They were trialing, and based on user experience and usability, they would recommend the software up to their managers and the executives. And thankfully, the executives listened and adopted those solutions second. So this is like a bottom-up approach to SaaS adoption. And like as I mentioned, companies like Salesforce were part of the first wave. Companies like Slack are part of the second wave, and this is powering what we call product-led growth. And I feel like we are, over the last 5 years, we've heard a lot about product-led growth. And the barrier to entry in this model is making really great products. Like if you have an amazing product that's easy to use, easy to sign up for, easy to deploy, it's well engineered, then you have a barrier to entry. But I see a little problem with this. And the problem with a product-led growth approach is this. This is a website that I just found called zerocode.com last year. If you go to zerocode.com, for about $149, you can buy the front end and the back end of pretty much any SaaS application out there, whether that's Reddit, Airbnb, even Thinkific, Amazon, Uber. Today, like the core product is getting commoditized very, very quickly. So for $250, you can make a site that looks, feels, and acts exactly like Airbnb over a weekend. And this is the power of the no-code, low-code movement. So what happens when everyone can build SaaS? Well, everyone builds SaaS. About 10 years ago, we had 150 companies that sold to marketers. You've probably seen the slide. Today, there are over 7,000 applications, softwares that sell to marketers. And so if you're a marketer buying software today, it's really different. It's really difficult to know what products you should buy, what the differences are, and how they work. So a product-led approach only works when there are a few products to choose from. When there's over 7,000 products to choose from, product-led growth starts to break down. So this is why I think my sort of big bold statement for the day is that product-based differentiation is dead. If you are relying on your product and experience to stand out in the market, I have some tough news for you. It's going to get harder and harder to do because low code and no code are smashing the barriers to entry. People are building software applications over a weekend. And so the question is, in that kind of a market environment where product-led growth is not sustainable and people can barely find your product, let alone use it and adopt it, what will the next model be? What will SaaS 3.0 look like? What will SaaS leaders and executives build to actually have moat in their markets? That's the question that we're going to explore today. So in the next 15 minutes or so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you three things. I'm going to share with you what I consider my number one secret. I call this the NFX secret that I've learned from looking at companies that I really admire, like Gong and Thinkific and Peloton. I'm going to walk you through 6 case studies on how companies, specifically SaaS companies, are doing this today. And I'll share with you a simple 3-step framework that I call the UCI framework that you can steal and start implementing today. So just so I get a sense of the room, give me a little yes if you already have a community or you're thinking about investing in community program this year. Okay, so it looks like a lot of people are already investing in it. So if you're already investing in community, the UCI framework is going to teach you how to actually expand your offering, right? And if you are not building a community, or if you haven't started a community yet, then the UCI framework will tell you how to actually get started. So let's jump in to this secret. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint a very quick picture on some insights and lessons that I've learned from 6 companies that I personally admire and love looking at. And some of these logos might be familiar, some of them might be new to you. Let's take a look at this company. This company started off as a skateboarding shop, like a shop where you could buy skateboards online. And then while building this company, the founders realized that, wow, it's really hard to set up an e-commerce store. I bet other people are having a hard time doing this as well. So they went out and talked to a few of their friends, and they were like, wow, we're all struggling with selling stuff online. And so that's how Shopify got started. The founder said, we want to make a movement where e-commerce is better and easier for everyone. That's our movement. We want to empower the person trying to sell online. That was their definition. That was their movement. And then they came up with a couple of rituals that helped them get there. One of the things Shopify did very early on is they started doing events and community work, both at the international as well as at the local level. So at the international level, they created a Shopify community. Today, it has, I think, over like 100,000 members and millions of posts where e-commerce professionals talk to each other about how to sell stuff online. And at a local level, they actually did events and programming where they would connect e-commerce like practitioners and said, hey, let's get in a room, let's talk about what it is that you're struggling with. And by engaging their community, both at a local and international level, Shopify has over the last 7 years become one of the largest SaaS companies in the world, smashing through $1 billion in revenue very early on. And about 9 out of 10 people who are part of the Shopify ecosystem at some point have interacted with the community, because building e-commerce is not easy by yourself. You need a family to get you there. And that's what Shopify provides. So Shopify built a movement around how do we make e-commerce better for everyone? And they unlocked their community to help with support while they were scaling. So they were very focused on let's help each other from a support perspective. That's Shopify's story. The next one is a company that I worked at about 6 years ago. This company started in Tel Aviv, Israel, and their founders had this notion. They said, wow, salespeople are using emotions today to talk about whether a deal is going to close or not, and they're not relying on data. So we want to power salespeople with AI and data. But the problem is salespeople don't really love data. So how do we get sales professionals to love data? This is the story of Gong.io, a company that went from starting in 2016 to being an $8 billion, almost a decacorn in 5 years flat. And we'll talk a little bit about how they use community to unlock that growth. Very early on, they set some rituals, and I'll share with you some of the rituals they did. One of the first things they did is their CMO and their salesperson and their content person sat down and said, content is not just a SEO thing. We need to hear from actual salespeople on how they're using data to do better. So they got their own sales leader, their own head of sales, and their own sales managers to write content on LinkedIn about how they were using data to be better sales professionals and to close more revenue. And they added a lot of like crazy graphics and colorful images, and they started posting about how they were using Gong themselves. Initially, they got a little bit of traction, but once they started sharing their results more broadly and started open sourcing their data on LinkedIn, that's when it started going viral. And salespeople were tagging each other and saying, hey, have you checked out this data from Gong before? And Gong very quickly, over a year or two, was able to build a followership of over 100,000 people, 100,000 people who care about sales, who care about data, and talk to each other about how to use data to do better. The second ritual Gong does is they put their customers actually on billboards. So the people who are championing them on LinkedIn, they put them on virtual billboards, they put them on physical billboards, and they celebrate the hell out of their customer base and say, hey, these are our champions. These are salespeople who love data. Do you want to be like this person? And so they really take care of their raving fan base and promote them and make them the heroes of the story. What Gong has been able to do is in less than 5 years, get to an $8 billion valuation and over 100,000 followers. But the important thing is Gong didn't create a community. They just had a message that sales needs to be more data-led. They did a great job of writing about that message on LinkedIn and connecting people who share that message. And that's how the community started. They didn't have a platform. They didn't have a program. They just started talking about the problem that they're passionate about. And today, if any sales leader on LinkedIn asks about a sales tool, you'll see just hundreds of comments from people saying you have to use Gong. And so what Gong does behind the scenes is they have something called the raving fan base, where they collect a list of their biggest fans. And they basically tag them in posts, or they'll send them links to posts where people need to respond. And they unlock their raving fan base on anybody who's talking about sales tools on LinkedIn. That's the story of how Gong unlocked created a movement around database sales, and they unlocked their community for top of funnel acquisition and top of funnel growth. The third story is from a smaller tech startup that I got to meet in Ottawa last November. And this is a company called Fellow. And the founder of Fellow has a simple mission. He's like, how do we help people run more productive meetings? And they created a solution for that, which is called Fellow. You should check it out. It's a great application. But one of their primary rituals is to get together all the managers that they work with and something called like a sort of a monthly Twitter chat. And they say, hey, let's talk about what's hard, what is the difficult part of being a manager? And they're able to connect managers from different industries and different use cases and just talk about management problems, leading teams, motivating people, compensation, hiring, firing. And as part of their ritual, they talk about how to run more effective meetings. But that isn't the goal. That's sort of like a secondary outcome. And by creating this ritual, Fellow has been able to build an amazing community of managers across different industries who love managing and giving back time to their employees. So using this community, they've been able to power over 2 million meetings, and they're growing very quickly. But they started with a simple insight: let's connect the people who already care about being good managers and bring them together in a room. So very simple start. They created a movement around better management and better time management, and they unlocked their community to find the early champions. The next one is case study is the one we're very familiar with. In the early days, Peloton was an exercise bike, and it was a good exercise bike. It started on Kickstarter, actually, I think in 2013, and it was it was a well-funded Kickstarter campaign. But they raised about $300,000 for this bike, at-home fitness bike. And at the time, at-home fitness bikes had been around for 3 decades. You would see these terrible infomercials on television, and they were just kind of like not a great product. Give me a shout out on the chat if you've actually ever done a Peloton class today. I'm just curious if anyone's actually experienced it. Okay, so a couple of proud owners and addicts. So like, look at the word Leah said. She said she's an addict of Peloton, which not a lot of people say about gym equipment. And a couple of people said they haven't used it so far. So the mission was to say, okay, we want to be more than an exercise bike. We want to connect people who are working out at home, right? And keep in mind the key word here is connection. From the very early days, from 2013, they said, we don't want to be a fitness bike company. We want to be a connection company. And Lisa, I'm very well aware that in the last week or so, Peloton has had some like really rough news. So we'll talk a little bit about the dark side of going only community led without having any product to back it up. And so if you look at Peloton's story in the last 1 year, it hasn't been so pretty. But if you look at the first 8 years, there's a beautiful story that comes out of it. And one of the biggest rituals that Peloton has is when you take a Peloton class, you see a live leaderboard with lots of faces. So like all of Peloton's branding is about faces, 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 faces. When you're on there, you feel like you're riding with other people. I was a triathlete. Like I was a triathlete before I'd heard of Peloton. I'd completed an Ironman and I trained very hard. But the first time I got on Peloton, I promise you, I biked harder than I'd ever done in 10 years of being a triathlete. And that's because the competition aspect and trying to compete with other people all across the world live was a very addictive experience. So they really create their live sort of a leaderboard experience. And their second ritual, which I think all of you can steal today, is they give shout outs to their best customers live in the classes. So if you hit 50 classes or 100 classes or 1,000 classes, they'll say, hey, Victoria from Kansas City, shout out on hitting 50 classes or 100 classes. So by acknowledging their biggest fans live in front of other people, they create raving fans, and they create people like Leah, who said, they're addicts of the Peloton experience. So what Peloton really did is they said, okay, we're going to create a movement around people working out at home, and we're going to unlock that movement to create a really sticky product. So I think last year, Peloton did $4 billion in revenue, which is kind of absurd for a company that makes at-home fitness bikes. A lot of that revenue actually comes from the SaaS subscription on top of the product. So they sell their $3,000 bike, and then they charge $50 on top to actually use the bike. And they have over $2.5 million last year. So a quick note from Angie on Peloton's stock price. So in the last year, the Peloton stock price has done really poorly because I think that, they were completely overvalued. And there's no reason they should have been worth more than Ford. But the story I'm trying to tell here is that they use that community and they use that story to get to that $35 billion valuation, to get to an IPO, to get to a Ford-sized company. So if you're watching this webinar, you probably aren't a $50 billion company. You're trying to get there. And so, the story is about looking at Peloton's rise here. Okay, and the last case study I wanted to share, this is sort of like my personal favorite. It's a personal story as well. Actually, there's one more before we share the personal story. This is a story of two people that I consider extremely, extremely smart. They wanted to build a movement around teaching people how to learn a new language, which is a really worthy cause. So they said, hey, how do we connect people who want to learn a new language all across the world? Because right now, Rosetta Stone is expensive and it excludes a lot of people. So this is a story of Duolingo. This is an app that I love using. I learned a little bit of Espanol on this app. So if you've used Duolingo before, give me a thumbs up on the chat, just so I know how many people know this experience. But when Duolingo first started, all they did was they created 4 courses. They created 4 courses in 4 languages and say, hey, this is our experience of learning a new language. But then people really started loving their language learning app, and they said, hey, we want more languages. We want, 4 languages is good, but we want courses in like 100 different languages. And here's the brilliant thing Duolingo did. They had 2 options. The first option was to go out and hire experts from that language to create a course and pay them to build it, their actual core product. Or their second alternative was to go to their community and say, hey, you like Duolingo, would you consider building a course in a language that you know for us for free? Like, you basically get nothing out of it, but you help us build a product. And guess what? In the next 2.5 years, their community built over 90 courses in 35 different languages and just gave it to Duolingo and said, let's open source this. because we love sharing our language and we want to see it grow. So all Duolingo did was they asked their community, will you help build for us? Will you help build with us? And in return, what Duolingo did was they created these local chapters where people could meet up. Most of these chapters are run locally by local ambassadors that are not on the payroll, but Duolingo just created the framework for them to connect, go to meetups. They send them little like swag for them to like celebrate the Duolingo experience. And they today have chapters in over 100 different cities of people learning languages all across the world. And all of this was powered by community. So Duolingo wanted to create a movement around, and today they have over half a billion users of people learning a new language. And all of their products is powered by the community. And I think that is just like an amazing experience. So they created a movement around learning a new language, and they unlocked their community to actually build their core product. The question I have for all of you is, you looked at a couple of stories. You'll see a little pattern here emerging. And I want you to spend some time thinking about the pattern. And the one question I want you to ask yourself is, in one line, what kind of movement are you building? One more time. In one line, what kind of movement are you building? Who are you uniting? What are you uniting about? So if you have that statement, put it down in the chat. I'd love to see it. If not, you have about 10 more minutes to get to that. And I'll ask you that again in about 10 minutes. What kind of movement are you building? Who are you uniting? So think about that statement over the next 10 minutes. The last case study we're going to talk about here is a personal one, as I mentioned. The man here on the bottom left, let me just move my screen over, is my dad. And about 2 years ago, he was teaching finance classes in a small classroom in Kolkata with about 15 students at a time. And he came to me 2 years ago and he was like, hey, I feel like there's other people outside who want to learn finance, specifically in a language called Bengali. So it's a language, it's a regional language of India. And he was like, hey, how do I teach other people who are not in Calcutta about finance and education? So 2 years ago, just 2 years ago, he started a YouTube channel with 41 subscribers and just started sharing his knowledge in Bengali and finance online. In 2 years, this man, who's 63 years old and is a grandpa with silver hair, has over 160,000 subscribers on YouTube. He's like an actual YouTube star. He got an award from the CEO of YouTube for building an amazing channel. And he runs a community of over 100,000 people who chat about this stuff every single day. From a ritual perspective, he did 2 rituals. He created a simple free Telegram group for people to join, and it's free to join. And every day, every morning before the markets open, he makes one statement about what he thinks is going to happen about in the market that day, and he invites his followers to debate and discuss. So that's one of the rituals. And the second ritual is they meet up once a month live to talk about education in finance. So that's what I love. It's like once a month they meet together as a community and they say, hey, what are the trending topics that we should be learning about? Whether it's crypto or whether it's a specific company or whether it's a specific financial metric, but they really sort of work on it together as a community. So his big audience is on YouTube, and his community runs on a free platform called Telegram. And over 2 years, he's built this amazing business where he teaches 50,000 people all across the world. He has a whole suite of products, all from just like saying, I want to create people who, I want to connect people who want to learn finance in Bangla. And I'm going to do this on open platforms like YouTube and Telegram. So there are several other case studies that I didn't have the time to actually get into today, which I will share with you towards the end of this session. So I want to paint a picture on what some of these companies are doing and how they're using communities in very different ways. So for support, for activation, for growth, for business, for revenue, for retention. And so now, if you've been following this, you probably have noticed a trend here. So what is the pattern? What's sort of the trend, or what's the pattern behind all of these community stories? This is the framework of how people build communities in general. Somebody stands up and says, something is broken, something is not right, this shouldn't be this way. if you don't take anything away from this session, the one thing I want you to remember is you have to stand up and say, something is broken, something is bad, something isn't working, and I'm going to do something about it. Without that statement, you don't have a community, you don't have a movement. So ask yourself, what is that statement? What do you believe is broken out in the world? What do you think is bad out in the world? What are you hoping to change for the better? The second step is go out and find people who believe the same thing. The third step is to find a way for those people to connect, either online or offline. And this is becoming super easy now with a host variety of tools. The fourth step is to say, hey, how can we help each other do better, right? And connect them, create connections, create actual utility in the community where you help them, they help each other, and everyone gets better at whatever it is that they're trying to do. And the last step, very important step, is to celebrate and grow. Is when someone hits a milestone or an achievement or a new job or whatever it is, celebrate your members and say, hey, you are doing great, keep going. And by the way, if you know any friends or if you have people who would love to be a part of this community, please invite them. This is sort of like the big idea behind community building. This is the big secret. This is what I called NFX, or network effects. If you are in SaaS and you are a growing company in SaaS, customer support doesn't scale. It grows one-to-one. Customer success also doesn't scale. If you have 10 more customers, you probably need 2 or 3 more CSMs. If you have 10 more customers, you probably need 1 or 2 support people. But community scales exponentially. With a community of 8 people, you've already created 26 connections. And so as your company grows, community can scale by itself. It doesn't need extra resources. And as long as you figure out a way for members to help each other and for the community to manage itself and moderate itself. So that's the NFX secret that all these companies have unlocked, is that they don't scale using CS or sales or support, because those things don't scale. They scale using community, and this is community-led growth. This is the big NFX secret. So everything can be commoditized out there today, except for trust and attention, and that's what you need to be building. So my prediction is in the future, every company will be a community-first company. We'll see a shift from product-led growth to community-led growth. And today I'm going to walk you through a framework on how you can start implementing this today in your own company, regardless of what stage you're at. So as I mentioned, if you're getting started with community, this is for you. If you already have a community, I'm going to show you how to escalate your community and make it larger and bigger based on the case studies I've seen so far. So I just painted a picture on what the ascension ladder looks like. You start by saying something is broken, go find people who believe that, then connect them and create a connection and utility for each other, find ways for them to help each other, and then ultimately celebrate them. But what does this look like for SaaS? If you're a SaaS company out there, how do you actually start implementing this? What's the first step? And for that, I created something I call the UCI model. This model is brand new. I just sort of released it this year. So if you have feedback, or if you think there's ways to improve the model, I would also love to hear from you. But let me walk you through what the UCI model is and how you can implement it for your SaaS company today. So the first pillar of UCI is, the first layer is U is for utility. Everyone wants to create a movement. Everyone wants to do big things. Everyone wants to be the category creator. But my perspective is the community needs to have a utility layer. People need to be find value from the community before they're willing to invest in it. And some of the tactics you can deploy today to drive utility in a community is simple things like creating a chat site where people can chat with each other in real time, like in Slack or Facebook, or now lots of new applications out there that help you do this. Produce content that is actually educative and not just SEO stuff, right? Like teach and educate your audience. That's value driving. Create templates. Create a forum where people can ask each other questions. Open source your product roadmap and invite people to participate in the roadmap, give you ideas and give you feedback on the roadmap. Create a roadmap or an open roadmap where people can upvote and downvote and see how their requests are being tracked. Create a resource library of all the amazing articles and templates and tools and tricks people know about your product or just about their job. So think beyond your SaaS, like how can you educate your person on their jobs to be done and not just the SaaS application. So these are some of the tactics at the utility layer. Oops. The second layer, that's my little bike sound in the back. The second layer is the connection layer. So once people have gotten some utility from the product or from the community, they're now looking to the next step, which is to actually create connection. And what I mean by that is you need to find ways for your community to actually connect with each other outside of you, right? And some of the tactics you can steal here are things like meetups, creating a space for them to DM each other, maybe a member directory where they can look each other up and see, like, learn about their backgrounds. You can use simple Slack applications like Donut to create coffee introductions where people meet one-on-one and grow their own network. People love meeting new people and people love networking. You can consider creating something like a leaderboard where the most engaged and the most active community members get recognition for it. You could even consider creating something like a service marketplace. So for example, there are people who use your SaaS, and then there's probably some people who are experts at your SaaS, and find ways for them to like connect with each other. Or you could create something like a roundtable where people come together and exchange ideas. So that's the second layer of the UCI model, which is creating connection. The third and final layer is probably the most important layer, is find ways to create identity. So people will come for the content, but they will stay for the community, and they will stay and they will sort of promote you for the identity, right? So if you think about Gong, they sell a simple solution, which helps you record your calls and analyze that stuff. So the utility there, the utility value is they provide a lot of content on how to be good at sales. Their second layer is the connection layer, where they create the Gong community, where sales managers and leaders can connect with each other. But the third layer, the most important and the hardest to crack, is the identity layer, right? Like, can you create something where everyone says, yes, I belong to this, I am this person? And this is very hard to do. Like, some examples are, there's a community out there called CMX, which is a community for community managers. The community I run is for customer education professionals, but our communities are designed around saying, hey, if you are a customer education professional, you belong here. So creating that identity layer is the hardest. And if you have good ideas, I'm happy to learn from them. But some of the tactics you can steal today are things like industry awards, conferences where you bring people together around a particular topic. This is one of my favorite ones, is declare an annual holiday. Like, yesterday was Community Managers Appreciation Day, which is kind of like a made up holiday, but now it's been going on for a few years and people have started adopting it. But like some organization or company back in the day just like made up this annual holiday, right? Is like, I declared September 24th as Customer Education Appreciation Day. Completely made it up, but it's catching traction and people are starting to adopt it, which I absolutely love. And another tactic you could steal is maybe create some certifications around your product. So that's your ascension ladder. I've laid out a couple of the tactics that you can steal and start implementing today if you aren't already doing this. If you'd love to chat more, I'm obviously happy to talk more. I have about 5 minutes or so, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through two quick bonus case studies of two companies that I absolutely love. The first one is Notion, my favorite SaaS application ever. I love using Notion. I'm in no way affiliated with Notion. I just love the product. And when Notion started, they said, okay, how do we actually deploy community across the entire journey? So not just for one value, how do we create, how do we use community-led growth across the awareness pillar, the conversion pillar, and finally the upgrade and expansion pillar? So for sort of top of the funnel awareness, what Notion did was they created a small meetup in Singapore. The founders were going to Singapore and just tweeted saying, hey, anyone want to connect? And a bunch of people, 20 people responded. That became 150,000 person subreddit where people were talking about Notion. And now there are small communities like Facebook groups of like Notion Korea, each with 30, 40,000 members. So these communities spread the message of Notion, and a lot more people find out about Notion through these communities than any marketing or PR that Notion could do themselves. The second step, now you want them to convert into actual customers, and you actually want them to activate and use your product. So what Notion did here is they realized that their community was building a lot of great templates that help people get started. So their first pass was to just collect all these templates and put it on a directory. Then they realized that people were actually building content on YouTube and blogs on how to use Notion. And so they encouraged their community members to create blogs, create YouTube videos, and they, it would send out like Notion stickers and swag to reward them. right? And then ultimately they ended up creating a marketplace where people who were building things like cool things on Notion could sell it to other people looking for solutions. So this really helped people get started with Notion. And this was, they were able to deploy this way faster than anything they could build internally. So imagine an internal content team trying to build these templates, or an internal marketing, customer marketing team trying to build all these. That would just take too long. It would be too expensive. So they just turned to the community itself. And the last one, I think this is sort of like the brilliant move, is they use community for actually upgrading and expanding. So now you've landed the SaaS deal. Some people are using it, but how do you actually make sure it's sticky? How do you make sure that it expands across the different teams of the SaaS company? So the first thing they did was they created a sub-community of people who loved using Notions within corporations, and created what they call their champion network. And they just connected them and allowed them to like talk to each other. From the champion network, what emerged were these actual consultants that said, hey, I want to help other companies use Notion. And so Notion made that a formal program. They gave them a certification, and they put them on their website and said, hey, if you're a company looking to implement Notion, reach out to these certified consultants. And these consultants are an extension of Notion's CS team. They're an extension of Notion's support team. Sometimes they're even an extension of Notion's sales team. So Notion has reached a $10 billion valuation with I think only a few hundred, like 100 or 200 employees. And they've done this because they really relied on the power of community to get them there. So I'm a big fan of what Notion has done. It's one of my favorite SaaS applications. And the second bonus case study is my own company, Thinkific, or not my own company, the company I currently work for, Thinkific. And we have stolen a lot, or borrowed heavily, a lot of the ideas from Notion. And so I'll walk you through exactly how how Thinkific does some of these same things as well. So we're creating a movement around how people can share their knowledge online by creating online courses. And we use community across the entire funnel of awareness, conversion, and expansion. So let me just walk you through how. At the awareness level, my team and I, you'll see some people in the chat here like Kiri and Jen. They help me run Thinkific Community, which is a community of over 30,000 online course creators on Facebook. And they invite their friends and they invite other people who are interested in this space. And this community is a huge way of how people find out about Thinkific, and how they just get more aware about online course creation in general. So we create an open community where anyone can join and talk about online course creation. And that's how community helps the awareness and reach pillar. From there, what we do is we want people to actually buy Thinkific and convert and become users. And so a lot of people in our community wanted to create apps on our platform. And so we created a sub-community of app developers. And these people have created amazing products that help people choose Thinkific and extend Thinkific's functionality beyond things that we could build ourselves. So like email marketing, SMS marketing, pop-up landing pages, checkout features, things that we couldn't build ourselves, our community was building. And so all we did was we connected those people with our customers. And that's what drives a lot of conversion and early activation in the product. And the last pillar is our upgrade and expand. So now once people are using Thinkific, how do we help people use more of Thinkific and go up into the bigger tiers? And what we did was we found within our community some people who were establishing themselves as experts of Thinkific, just like Notion had done. And so we created an expert community, worked with them, educated them on how to best deploy Thinkific. And you can find these services on our website and connect with these people. And these people who don't work for Thinkific help other companies use Thinkific, expand with Thinkific, grow with Thinkific. And it's a big way of how customers go from self-serve to more premium and plus and enterprise level plans, because they work with these consultants and they say, oh, in order to do these things, you need to get to the next stage. So very similar to how Notion does this, but we use community across the journey for awareness, for conversion, and expansion. And so if you really think about community holistically, you will see that you can use it for growth across the entire pillar. We have some fun rituals that you can share, and you can talk to Kiri, who's in the chat, as well as Jen, who's in the chat. One of the things we do is we do Welcome Wednesdays, where we welcome all our new folks on Wednesdays. We have an ambassador program where people can raise their hands and say, hey, I want to be an ambassador. I want to help moderate. And we do something called Project Champagne, where we send out really cool swag when our customers and our community members hit milestones in their business. So we obviously our community program is 5 years old, so we have a little more budget and we have a full team. But you can always start these things in a very, very small way and maybe do like digital versions of these if you aren't ready for fully funded programs. So I had asked you 10 minutes ago to share what kind of movement will you build. So if hopefully by now you've unlocked that answer for yourself. And if you have, drop it in the chat in one sentence. What kind of movement will you build? And who are you connecting? I'd love to hear that in the chat. That's all I have for the prepared slide of the presentation. If you would like to get a full copy of all the bonus case studies I wasn't able to get to, you can scan this QR code. It'll take you to a link that you can just drop me a DM on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to send you over all the case studies as well as the cases we weren't able to cover. But that's my big message: is community-led growth is the next big wave. If you can unlock community, you'll see growth across the entire customer funnel. You can steal ideas from some of the best companies out there. It's easy to get started. There are free tools that I'd be happy to share that help you get started. So I'll pass it back to Lloyd, and we'd be happy to jump into questions.
Awesome. This was a great session. My favorite topic. We leverage and built this traction community before we even had the Boast AI product, and it's been a big driver for our growth. We bootstrapped to 8 figures. We went from 30 people to 120 people without any major spend on external recruiters, because once you build this community, you start building a mini brand of sorts, right? There's a question here from Suman. What if you're creating a community in a relatively new industry that you are also trying to coin, like creating a category? And I think, not to go too far, I'm an engineer, but everything I learned about marketing was from HubSpot. And back in the day, before HubSpot even had the marketing automation platform, they started the inbound marketing community, and they started this community of practice, right? You look at community of practice and then community of product, and their community of practice was around educating people who want to learn about digital marketing. And they put out all this content and courses and started meetups. And they did that for a while. And then one day they came out with a product and said, hey, we help you automate it all. Everything I learned about marketing back in the 2000s was through HubSpot. Even Gainsight, if you look at it, they created a category around customer success. And I came up with everything I learned about community building was HubSpot. And then Gainsight, when I went to Gainsight's Pulse community, and they created this community around customer success professionals and making them successful, starting with one audience and throwing up that hand, like you said, is what is the pain point. But what are your thoughts here? What if you're creating a community in a relatively new industry that you are also trying to coin? Where do you start?
Yeah, I'd love to hear who else is doing this. So if you're creating a community in a relatively new category, like give me a yes in the chat, or a me, just so I know. I think Suman's question is, he's from Clue, which is in the competitive intelligence space, and it's brand new. No one knows what the F competitive intelligence is. And I think if you're in that kind of a space, even better. Like, it's a green field. No one owns it. Competitive intelligence or competitive enablement. You can be the person that says, hey, competitive intelligence is how sales and marketing teams now go to market. You can create the certification. You can create the competitivintelligence.com community. It's ideally suited for people who are in new fields, because you can then really own the category. And one of the ways to own the category is to own the community that does that, right? So if Gong has a category called revenue intelligence, and they have the revenue intelligence podcast, they have the revenue intelligence community. And so community is a huge way on how to be a category leader. And so, yeah, Suman, I'm super excited for what Clue can do with community this year. And be happy to chat more as well. And
they have one of the best CEOs. Jason Smith is one of my really good friends and favorite people all around in tech. Lisa asked here, if you're in SaaS, how do you stand out when there are so many communities and associations? Suma, what is your take? Because you're in somewhat of a competitive space as well, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the big insight here is that you're not going to own, like, you can't own a community, right? You cannot own people. There's no ownership here. There's no exclusivity here. There's no, Peter Thiel 0 to 1, like, monopoly here. People will join communities that they feel attracted to and that they feel inspired by. If your competitors have a community or are building one, that's fine. Clearly, people choose your products. If they choose your product over your competitors, they might also choose your community over your competitors. And you know, I work for Thinkific, but I'm also part of my competitors' communities, and I learn a lot from that as well. And you know, that doesn't make me feel like that doesn't make me dislike my community. I just learn different things from different people. So like Traction, for example, is a community of entrepreneurs, but it's not the only one. There are other communities for entrepreneurs, and you know, Traction attracts a certain kind of people. Really that believe what Lloyd believes and you know, believe in the entrepreneurial story. There are other communities for entrepreneurs that believe slightly other things, and there are people who are members of both. So I would get out of the like, oh, this already exists or this already has happened, and just say, how can we have a very specific message, and you will attract the people that believe that message. So you know, maybe you think that like sales leaders should be more empathy driven instead of data driven, and you can create a sales leader community based on that.
Definitely. And, you know, I often say it belongs to the community. You can't own the community. It belongs to the community. And if multiple people are on that same mission, that community turns into a big movement. And if you're in category creation, in any case, you can't be in a category where one company only exists. There's no category with just one company, right? And David asks here, what are some non-obvious tips for initially starting the community and getting eyes on content you're producing and mission you're working towards? Insights there.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So one of the things I would say is like connect with other community managers, right? Like there's a lot of, if you're just getting started out, or if you're like, hey, I don't know exactly what I'm doing. My biggest insight is that don't take advice from me, because I only have, you know, a very limited perspective and limited experience. My first and best advice is go connect with other community managers. There's two places you can do that. I have a community of community managers at customereducation.org. We are about 1,000 people or so in B2B SaaS, but we only focus on B2B SaaS community managers. And then there's a bigger, broader organization called CMX, which is about I think they're probably like about 10,000 members, and they are dedicated to community managers. So go talk to them, learn insights. Some of the things that really helped me early on is to do things that don't scale, right? So like one of the things I did in my own community, if you join today, you'll see that I send each and every single person who joins my community a personal DM on Slack. And there are hundreds of people who join my community, right? So do things early on that don't scale. And initially, it's simple as like when someone joins a community, say, hey, welcome, tell us a little bit about how you found us. And like, you know, who's one person that you think should be here, right? And that's like a simple hack to get exponential growth on your community. If you're producing content, do what Lloyd does, right? Like he does this one pillar thing, like this Traction talk, and then Lloyd's team is going to take this and chop it up into YouTube, into a podcast, into shorts, into reels, and you know, and then he's going to ask me, hey, who should my next guest be? Right. So Lloyd does this really beautifully, where he takes one piece of content, he repurposes it, and at the end of that piece of content, he asks that person, who should be my next person, right? And is able to create like a little engine that creates content. So those would be my two advices: connect with other people, ask them the same question, and then create like a content pillar that like becomes an engine over time.
And you know what we did was we started with one, and Jen, who's now at Thinkific, was with us at Traction in the early days. Is you focus on one audience. We used to do these pizza nights. Those pizza nights, every time would bring a new speaker, and we'd do it very consistently, and more people showed up. And then eventually we said we got to do a conference. And then that evolved into, you know, 100 plus webinars a year. You do one thing really well. Everyone asks me, should I start Facebook group? Should I start a Slack group? The world doesn't need 1,000 Slack group or Facebook group. Do one thing, figure out the white space, figure out your ideal customer profile, and deliver that one thing very consistently. And then when you start building a following, then you can start chopping it up as well. I want to take a couple more questions here. One on, you know, you are a unicorn community builder. What are the key skills required to be a great community builder? And when you're starting to build your community team, who do you hire?
Yeah, great question. So the jury is out on this one, and CMX has some data and there isn't a clear answer. I can tell you what I personally feel. The people that I love hiring on community teams So you basically have two options. You have people who are expert community builders. They've done it before. They know the tips and tricks, and they are like expert in the domain of community building. And then there's this other circle of people. And these are people who have no community experience, but they just care about your topic. They are just passionate. They're vocal. They don't know anything about SaaS community building. They don't know the metrics. They don't know the business model, but they give a shit about your topic. And I think as you build a team, like trying to find a confluence of those two skill sets is really important, of people who are experts in domain, like no community building, no practices, no metrics, no ROI, can get budget, can run programs. But you also need people who care about what you're saying. So when I hire my community team, I hire a mix of people who come from the community like domain, but I also hire my customers or my experts or community members, right? Because they care about what I care about. So finding that like sweet balance between those two things is my recommendation.
Definitely. Kristen asks, do you have any resource recommendations for ambassador programs? You have a large community now. How do you take the next step and create this ambassador program? And back in the day, Startup Weekend did this, where they had different ambassadors in different cities. We host meetups in different cities, but how have you guys done it at Thinkific? How do you create ambassadors who are not on your payroll?
Yeah, I mean, Lloyd, I'd love to actually hear what you've done. I would say we've done an okay job. Like we aren't terrific at it yet. Like we haven't knocked it out of the park like some of the other companies have. But it started with something really simple. Like we saw in our community that there were few members. It's kind of like the 1-9-90 rule, right? So 1% of your people are super engaged. 9% of people are like, they participate, but they don't really post stuff or they don't really create stuff. And then 90% are just lurkers. They just observe. So we figured out who that 1% is. And we literally reached out and said, hey, would you want to be a moderator? And in exchange, we'll give you a discount on your SaaS license, right? Or we'll send you like a Thinkific hoodie, or we will send you, like we will give you early access to our product roadmap. So it doesn't have to be like monetary things. You can do, you can just give them exclusivity, and that makes them feel good. And then we found one person, she did a great job. And then we just asked her, we're like, hey, who else should be an ambassador? And she gave us a list of the next 10 people. So I would start small and start with just one person that you think could be an ambassador, work with them one-on-one, and then ask them what you should do next.
Fantastic. Yeah, completely agree with that. All right. You got these sort of romantics or people who are really passionate about your mission. And the thing, Traction is a nonprofit community. So the money goes back into the community. So finding ambassadors, and we're going to scale this. We haven't done a perfect or great job at it, but when we do meetups and dinners in different cities, we have local people that take the onus on organizing it. And, every ambassador, if you make them feel like a rock star, meaning get up on the stage, MC, run the show, run the event, they're building relationships. And you got to find those people who are really, really passionate about building relationships, who are driven by helping other people. I think it's like at the cusp of customer success and business development, you'll find those people and give them the resources to become successful. So there's this one question around time zone that came in the chat here, is how do you navigate challenges like time zone and language barriers? And you guys probably face that a lot more at Thinkific and your other communities, right?
We do, and to be honest, we haven't cracked it either. I think the company that has cracked it is probably Duolingo and Notion. So I would just like go back and study what they've done. The TLDR answer is that you just create local chapters. So like CMX has done this, Notion has done this, and Duolingo have done this successfully.
Yelp has done it. Canva has done it. I interviewed Canva's head of community a while ago, and she was at Yelp, and their playbook was literally creating local chapters, because if you send somebody from one time zone or one culture to another, it may be harder, and you want to reduce those barriers. So find people locally who can go out and build relationships, host events. Events is a great way for building community. I feel, right now we're sound and sight, right? But anytime you incorporate more than two senses, so like you're hosting events, it's taste, touch, smell, you start building even more genuine connections beyond sound and sight. There's something about shaking hands and kissing babies that really, really works. And I'm going to take the last question here. What is the key in building a community with professional managers? Craig, do you want to expand on that question a little bit? Maybe Craig, you can expand on that question. I didn't entirely follow it, but this has been a fantastic session. The recording is going to be on our YouTube channel. Just search Traction Conf on YouTube and hit the bell icon and subscribe, and you'll get notifications. We do 2 live webinars a week. And then when IRL comes back, we're hosting a big conference in August. We're going to release a book on community-led growth, and you'll see a lot of meetups once we're able to do that. So professional managers who want to solve a business problem, I think the same principles apply, right? Like people who are facing a problem and they want to do something about it, you bring them together. Maybe something as simple, I think like a lot of people are looking for a silver bullet, but it can be as simple as if they share a common theme, host a live webinar. I mean, we had 350 people sign up today, right? 100 or so showed up. The rest will go on the YouTube channel. Just host a live webinar. Find influencers who are relevant to that audience and that the audience respects, and interview them. And then do it consistently with cadence, and then spark a Q&A after the fact. So that's what's worked for me, definitely. And it seems like it's worked for Sumo as well. Awesome, Sumo. This was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. And namaste, love and peace, folks. By the way, I come from an Indian background too, although I didn't grow up in India. And I have a lot of outfits like that. So the next time we do this, I'm going to rock one too. Love and peace, brother.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.